morning. Thank you for joining me today. Appreciate it. Today we're going to be in Leviticus chapter 14, verses 1 through 57. The law of cleansing leper. The Lord spoke to Moses. This is the law of the diseased person on the day of his purification, when he is brought to the priest. The priest is to go outside the camp and examine the infection. If the infection of the diseased person has been healed, then the priest will command that 2 live, clean birds, a piece of cedar wood, a scrap of crimson fabric, and some twigs of hyssop be taken up for the one being cleansed. The priest will then command that 1 bird be slaughtered into a clay vessel over fresh water. Then he is to take the live bird, along with a piece of cedar wood, the scrap of crimson fabric, and the twigs of hyssop, and he is to dip them and the live bird in the blood of the bird slaughtered over the fresh water, and sprinkle it 7 times on the one being cleansed from the disease, pronounce him clean, and send the live bird away over the open countryside. The one being cleansed must then wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe in water, and so be clean. Then afterward he may enter the camp, but he must live outside his tent 7 days. When the 7th day comes, he must shave all his hair, his head, his beard, his eyebrows, all his hair, and he must wash his clothes, bathe his body in water, and so be clean. On the 8th day he must take 2 flawless male lambs, 1 flawless yearling female lamb, 3/10 of an ephah of choice wheat flour as a grain offering mixed with olive oil, and 1 log of olive oil. And the priest who pronounces him clean will have the man who is being cleansed stand along with these offerings before the Lord at the entrance of the meeting tent. The priest is to take 1 male lamb and present it for a guilt offering, along with the log of olive oil, and present them as a wave offering before the Lord. He must then slaughter the male lamb in the place where the sin offering and the burnt offering are slaughtered, in the sanctuary, because, like the sin offering, the guilt offering belongs to the priest. It is most holy. Then the priest is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the right earlobe of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, on the big toe of his right foot. The priest will then take some of the log of olive oil and pour it into his own left hand. Then the priest is to dip his right forefinger into the olive oil that is in his left hand, and sprinkle some of the olive oil with his finger 7 times before the Lord. The priest will then put some of the rest of the olive oil that is in his hand on the right earlobe of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on the blood of the guilt offering. And the remainder of the olive oil that is in his hand, the priest is to put on the head of the one being cleansed. So the priest is to make atonement for him before the Lord. The priest must then perform the sin offering and make atonement for the one being cleansed from his impurity. After that he is to slaughter the burnt offering, and the priest is to offer the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. So the priest is to make atonement for him, and he will be clean. If the person is poor and does not have sufficient means, he must take 1 male lamb as a guilt offering for a wave offering to make atonement for himself, 1/10 of an ephah of choice wheat flour mixed with olive oil for a grain offering, a log of olive oil with 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, which are within his means. 1 will be a sin offering, and the other a burnt offering. On the 8th day he must bring them for his purification to the priest at the entrance of the meeting tent before the Lord, and the priest is to take the male lamb of the guilt offering and the log of olive oil and wave them as a wave offering before the Lord. Then he is to slaughter the male lamb of the guilt offering, and the priest is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the right earlobe of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest will then pour some of the olive oil into his own left hand, and sprinkle some of the olive oil that is in his left hand with his right forefinger 7 times before the Lord. Then the priest is to put some of the olive oil that is in his hand on the right earlobe of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on the place of the blood of the guilt offering. And the remainder of the olive oil that is in the hand of the priest he is to put on the head of the one being cleansed, to make atonement for him before the Lord. He will then make 1 of the turtle doves or young pigeons, which are within his means, a sin offering, and the other a burnt offering, along with the grain offering. So the priest is to make atonement for the one being cleansed before the Lord. This is the law of the one in whom there is a diseased infection, who does not have sufficient means for his purification. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, "When you enter the land of Canaan, which I am about to give you to you for possession, and I put a diseased infection in a house, in the land you are to possess, then whoever owns the house must come and declare to the priest, something like an infection is visible to me in the house. Then the priest will command that the house be cleared before the priest enters to examine the infection, so that everything in the house does not become unclean, and afterward the priest will enter to examine the house. He is to examine the infection, and if the infection in the walls of the house consists of yellowish, green, or reddish eruptions, and it appears to be deeper than the surface of the wall, then the priest is to go out of the house to the doorway of the house and quarantine the house for 7 days. The priest must return on the 7th day and examine it, and if the infection has spread in the walls of the house, then the priest is to command that the stones that had the infection in them be pulled and thrown outside the city into an unclean place. Then he is to have the house scraped all around on the inside, and the plaster which is scraped off must be dumped outside the city into an unclean place. They are then to take other stones and replace those stones, and he is to take other plaster and replaster the house. If the infection returns and breaks out in the house after he has pulled out the stones, scraped the house, and it is replastered, the priest is to come and examine it, and if the infection has spread in the house, it is a malignant disease in the house, it is unclean. He must tear down the house, its stones, its wood, and all the plaster of the house, and bring all of it outside the city to an unclean place. Anyone who enters the house, all the days the priest has quarantined it, will be unclean until evening. Anyone who lies down in the house must wash his clothes. Anyone who eats in the house must wash his clothes. If, however, the priest enters and examines it, and the infection has not spread in the house after the house has been replastered, then the priest is to pronounce the house clean, because the infection has been healed. Then he is to take 2 birds, a piece of cedar wood, a scrap of crimson fabric, and some twigs of hyssop to decontaminate the house. And he is to slaughter 1 bird into a clay vessel over fresh water. He must then take the piece of cedar wood, the twigs of hyssop, the scrap of crimson fabric, and the live bird, and dip them in the blood of the slaughtered bird, and in the fresh water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. So he is to decontaminate the house with the blood of the bird, the fresh water, the live bird, the piece of cedar wood, the twigs of hyssop, and the scrap of crimson fabric. And he is to send the live bird away outside the city into the open countryside, so he is to make atonement for the house, and it will be clean. This is the law for all diseased infections, for scall, for the diseased garment, for the house, for the swelling, for the scab, and for the bright spot, to teach when something is unclean, and when it is clean. This is the law for dealing with infectious disease. It's interesting to me. Maybe it was Mike Winger, maybe it was Anthony Rogers, but one of the two brought up that oil. Oh, it was Mike Winger. Oil is representative of healing, oftentimes in the Bible. Like you have in the story of the Good Samaritan, the guy who got beat up, and the Samaritan took to the inn, had his wounds dressed and had oil placed on them. So I guess my point for bringing that up is you have this sacrifice that's being offered for the one who's being cleansed from leprosy or some infectious disease, and you have the blood from the sacrifice being put on the right side of his body, and you also have the oil being put over top of that, which I think is just kind of a neat picture of how healing comes from that forgiveness, I guess, because you have kind of the forgiveness of sin being associated with the blood of the sacrifice. So in this way, you have sin being forgiven and healing being brought about. Interesting that in the case of an infectious skin disease in a person and a spreading something in a house had the same sacrificial right as well, for each, I guess. Okay, continuing on. Mark chapter 6, verse 30 through verse 56. Yeah, definitely. I'm not even sure if I've ever seen like a infectious disease within a house, like a red something. Hopefully never. Sounds like a pain. So Mark 6. Then the apostles gathered around Jesus and told him everything they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come with me privately to an isolated place, and rest a while, for many were coming and going, and there was no time to eat." So they went away by themselves in a boat to some remote place. But many saw them leaving and recognized them, and they hurried on foot from all the towns and arrived there ahead of them. As Jesus came ashore, he saw the large crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he taught them many things. When it was already late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is an isolated place, and it is already very late. Send them away so that they can go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy something for themselves to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said, "Should we go and buy bread for 200 silver coins and give it to them to eat?" He said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he directed them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they reclined in groups of hundreds and fifties. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. He gave them to his disciples to serve the people, and he divided the fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And they picked up the broken pieces and fish that were left over, 12 baskets full. Now there were 5,000 men who ate the bread. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dispersed the crowd. After saying goodbye to them, he went to the mountain to pray. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. He saw them straining at the oars, because the wind was against them. As the night was ending, he came to them, walking on the sea, for he wanted to pass by them. When they saw him walking on the water, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them, "Have courage, it is I, do not be afraid." Then he went up with them into the boat, and the wind ceased. They were completely astonished, because they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. After they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and anchored there. As they got out of the boat, people immediately recognized Jesus. They ran through that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever he was rumored to be. And wherever he would go, into villages, towns, or countryside, they would place the sick in the marketplaces and would ask him if they could just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. Yeah. I guess I just want to highlight again the parallels of Jesus coming and the story of the Exodus. As you had God feeding the people with manna from heaven in the wilderness for 40 years, so too you have Jesus coming and feeding the people when there wasn't anything for them to eat. They were in a remote place, and nobody had anything, and but God provided for them in each case. And I think it's another clue that Mark is leaving about the identity of Christ. Like, who is this guy? He's feeding people now, and then he's walking on the water and calming the wind and the waves. That sounds kind of familiar. We had an instance in our history where God manipulated water. And in verse 51 and 52, they were completely astonished because they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. It sounds like they were pretty confused at this point of who Jesus was. Thanks. Okay, Psalm chapter 40, verses 1 through 10. I relied completely on the Lord, and he turned toward me and heard me cry for help. He lifted me out of the watery pit and out of the slimy mud. He placed my feet on a rock and gave me secure footing. He gave me reason to sing a new song, praising our God. May many see what God has done, so that they might swear allegiance to him and trust in the Lord. How blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord and does not seek help from the proud or from liars. O Lord, my God, you have accomplished many things. You have done amazing things and carried out your purposes for us. No one can thwart you. I want to declare them and talk about them, but they are too numerous to recount. Receiving sacrifices and offerings are not your primary concern. You make that quite clear to me. You do not ask for burnt sacrifices and sin offerings. Then I say, look, I come. What is written in the scroll pertains to me. I want to do what pleases you, my God. Your law dominates my thoughts. I have told the great assembly about your justice. Look, I spare no words. O Lord, you know this is true. I have not failed to tell about your justice. I spoke about your reliability and deliverance. I have not neglected to tell the great assembly about your loyal love and faithfulness. Well, that sounds pretty messianic right there. Verses 7 and 8 in particular. Look, I come. What is written in the scroll pertains to me. At the start of his ministry in probably Luke 4-ish, I'm not sure. Jesus opens the scroll of Isaiah and reads a passage of it and says, today this has been fulfilled within your hearing. So definitely creates the same imagery, in my mind anyway. And I guess a separate topic. So often throughout Israel's history, well, let me read the verse here first. Psalm 40, verse 4, how blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord and does not seek help from the proud or from liars. So, very often throughout Israel's history, they sought military assistance from the nations surrounding them, rather than turning to the Lord to have his help, which was a constant issue, I suppose. God was displeased with that. So I pray that we can seek help from the Lord when we need it. Proverbs 10, verses 11 and 12. The teaching of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the speech of the wicked conceals violence. Hatred stirs up dissension, but love covers all transgressions. Yeah, carrying on with the whole wisdom and folly thing. Wisdom actually preserves one's life. So, indeed, the teaching of the righteous is a fountain of life. Okay, well, thank you for joining me today. Definitely appreciate it. Hope you have a great day. Bye.